Hey, my name is Aaron Brown, lead pastor here at Woods Chapel, and today we are wrapping up this two-part series that has been about faith and mental health. And we're talking about this because your faith affects your mental health, and your mental health affects your faith, and God cares about this part of our lives. God deeply cares about this part of our lives. And last week we talked about anxiety, fear, and worry, and we drew from Scripture about how to deal with that. We also drew from the therapeutic community. How do we have tools to address those things? And today we're going to talk about depression, and I'm going to touch on suicide. And I got to let you know, at the very front of this, that there's no way we can cover everything that needs to be covered in the time that we have. There's just no way we can do that. In fact, I talked specifically about the issue of suicide in February when we did the series, that early in the year series. So I want you to know that if you want to know more, and I really would encourage you, have that particular message at your fingertips. It could be something that helps someone or helps you get through a very, very dark time. But today, we are going to go there, but we're going to go there in ways that I think will resource us when it comes to battling depression, when it comes to addressing suicide, that will resource us, that'll take us deeper into our scriptures and deeper into the very heart of God. So I encourage you to jump in with all of this. And we're doing this in September because, I hope you're aware, September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. And we as a church, one of our goals is to work with other churches, other organizations, and see the suicide rate go down in our community. That is one of our big goals. And we know that for us to see that happen, we have to do some things, and talking about it is one of those things. Talking about it is one of those things because this really matters. So let's talk about depression. Let's kind of dig in here. First of all, what is it? How would you define it? Well, here's a concise definition of depression. The most prominent symptoms of major depression are a severe and persistent low mood, profound sadness, or a sense of despair. One thing we need to know is that is what depression is, and people have that. There are moments when we have that. There are days that go by then that people just have that. It occurs because of circumstances or body chemistry or all kinds of things. It happens, and most of the time it goes away fairly quickly in a day or two. When it doesn't, when it goes for 2 weeks or more, it's called a major depressive disorder, major depressive episode. And that's a period of time, or 2 weeks or more. And that is when other symptoms begin to pile on top of those ones that I mentioned a bit ago. Things like loss of interest or pleasure in daily activities, problems sleeping, problems eating, energy issues, concentration issues, and issues of self-worth. Those are big ones, and I get it when I look at that list because I've battled depression myself off and on throughout a big chunk of my life, and I've had to deal with those things. And what I found for me when it comes to depression, there's a cycle that I can begin to see a pattern of, and one of the good things about seeing a pattern is you can break the pattern. And what I recognize is that depression for me, episodes of depression, have almost always begun, first of all, with fatigue. I'm just physically depleted because of whatever is happening in life and just simply not able to sleep. Fatigue usually begins it. Then there is a sense of loss of something, typically. Loss of, a friend or a connection or somebody, being a pastor, somebody at church that I really, really enjoyed and counted on dying or leaving or moving, something like that. Always seems to kind of spiral me down. Then a sense of failure. Put that in there. Either a real failure at something that I should have done better or a perceived failure. Maybe it wasn't even real. And then disconnection has always been a part of that spiral down for me. Realizing that friendships or things that I counted on or family members, I felt disconnected from them for one reason or another. And then worry on top of everything else. Worrying about my kids, worrying about my parents, worrying about church stuff, worrying about just all of those things for me tipped me from being in a place of being even keel to a spiral. It's what I call it, a spiral down. And to me, I had a name for depression whenever it hit me. I just called it the darkness. The darkness. Some of you may get that and understand that. But of course, All of that, when you're facing depression, it affects your relationships, it affects your marriage, it affects how you parent, it affects your work, it affects your faith, it affects pretty much what? Everything. Absolutely everything. So we need to talk about it. Well, let's do a little bit of exploring in the statistics here. Adolescents, aged 12 to 17, have the highest rates of depression at just over 14%. 14% of kids in that age range, 12 to 17, say that they have major depressive episodes. Young adults, aged 18 to 25, have the next highest rate of depression, just under 14%. Get this, severe depression among college students rose from 9.4% to 21.1% from 2013 to 2018. Adults over 50 have the lowest rates of depression at 4.5%. By the way, all of those stats are pre-pandemic. I asked this question last week. Do you think those stats have gone up or down since the pandemic? You know the answer to that. And all these numbers have gone up. But there was one Boston University study that found that depression rates have gone up threefold in certain categories in the United States throughout the pandemic. So some of those numbers, you take them, you multiply them by 3. It's shocking. And it makes me ask the question, okay, we're dealing with, my therapist said there is a mental health crisis going on in the United States. That's the way she put it. There's a mental health crisis happening. And my question is, why? There's got to be a why, right? I'm a why guy. I want to know why this is happening. Why? And there are 2 reasons that we see. One of them is statistical, that because people are willing to talk more about depression, because more people are able to voice that and be diagnosed with it, then the number of occurrences of depression go up. But that is only a small fraction of what we're seeing. When we factor that out, there are still large numbers of people that are encountering depression, more now than ever before. But we have to ask the question, why? And that gets us at the answer. Researchers look at this, and what they have said is that there are changes in our society that are happening at the core level. And when changes happen in a society at a core level, most of human history, those changes have happened fairly gradually. I mean, with some exceptions, but fairly gradually. What we have seen in the last 25 years are some gigantic changes in who we are as a culture. And what that's caused is low social support. This is what research is telling us. We have a place where we have low social support, intense individual competitiveness, increased social failure, loss of senses of community and connection to nature, and pressures to consume that have never been at the levels that they are right now. And all that is pointing to what they say is a decrease in socialization. A decrease in socialization that's impacting us, especially among teenagers and young adults today, compared to 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago. A loss of socialization, decrease. And now, when researchers are talking about socialization, what are they talking about? They're specifically talking about face-to-face contact with another human being. And actually talking with each other face-to-face. And now, some of you might argue, hey, there's a lot more socialization going on now than there ever has been. And what researchers would say is, yes, there is, but it's SBA. What is SBA? Screen-based activities. Screen-based activities. This is one of the huge dynamic changes in our culture over the last 15 years. Radically altered who we are, radically altered our social structures. 15 years ago is when the iPhone came out. 15 years ago. It was really the iPhone that began the smartphone revolution. It was the iPhone that began the immersion in us as human beings being connected 24 hours a day. Well, not 24. We do have to sleep a little bit, right? What researchers found when they recently surveyed teenagers, asked them, okay, well, how often are you online? How often are you online? 45% of those teenagers said that they were on the internet, and this is their words, almost constantly. Almost constantly. That was the phrase, how it was worded, almost constantly. And for older generations, It's different, but not much, and only by degrees. So the older you get beyond teenage years, the less time that you spend with screen time, but it's still significant, right? And what we don't know is, are people who are teenagers today going to keep that level of interaction with the internet in their pocket for the rest of their lives, or will it taper off as they grow older? We just don't know. These are things that we can't tell until we have some time pass. But it has reshaped our society. We are more connected and less connected at the same time. And what this points at is that the social structures that have been a part of life for generations and generations and generations are fading, and that unmooring, that's a word that was used, that unmooring, that disconnection from family and neighbors and social organizations, faith groups, is a big part of why depression has increased. We are simply not used to living the way our culture is pushing us to live. Now, some would put it this way: we're simply not meant to live the way our culture is pushing us to live. So that, here's where the rubber hits the road, so that when you face a death, when you face grief, when you face a natural disaster, when you face the loss of a job, a conflict, a health issue, aging, academic challenges, suddenly we don't have the relational and social resources that humans have had for thousands of years, that humans have counted on for thousands of years. And as a result, we have the definition of depression: low mood, profound sadness, and a sense of despair. So that all sounds pretty hopeless, doesn't it? Is there hope? Please say yes. Yeah, there's hope, right? I mean, we are people of great hope. I mean, what can we do if somebody we know is dealing with depression? These are the things that we can do that I think we, as ambassadors of Jesus, we've got to internalize this stuff. We all have to be practicing helpers, practicing servants, practicing, not in an official sense, but practicing counselors to the people around us. It's got to become more and more a part of our faith lives. So here are some of the things that we can do for ourselves, and we can say to the people around us, these are ways that can help when you are starting to deal with a depression or in a depressive episode. Number one, of course, seek professional help. And there are good Christian counselors, there are good secular counselors, there are psychiatrists that can be very, very helpful. They play such an important role in the healing process. Even online on betterhelp.com, you can do it online. There's so many ways that can help. And if you want a counselor, if you're looking for a counselor, call us here at church. We will let you know. We've got a list of people that we can refer you to that can help. But get help. Not only professional help with counselors, but also medications. I mean, there are medications that help for maybe short-term, maybe long-term. When I was facing a depressive episode about 10 years ago, I talked to my doctor, and it was hard to do. I didn't want to tell him because, telling your doctor that you'd struggle with this, it has that stigma. I'm weak somehow. But I just said, Doc, I'm going through this, and I need help. And he said, hey, I trust you, Aaron. I trust you. You wouldn't tell me this if it really weren't something big on your heart. And so let's just put you on something. And short term, this isn't going to be forever. And it really helped. It wasn't something where I felt totally different and detached from myself or anything, but I felt like I could manage better. It was one tool among many that helped me out. But what I'm getting at is this. As Christians, we believe that God uses tools to bring hope and healing. God uses therapists, counselors, and medicines to help us get where we need to be. Another way to get help is through your friends. And I said this last week when it came to anxiety and stress. Find friends who can lift you up when you're down. Don't go to your other friends who are depressed, and ask them to help lift you up. You know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, we all have those friends, and we love them, but there may be a time when you got to say, I can't spend as much time with you, because when I'm around you, I feel like I'm getting deeper into the spiral of darkness rather than getting up out of it. So you got to find those friends that are going to build you up. And we don't have a slide for this one, but I realized yesterday that I should have mentioned this, and I'm going to mention it. One of the other things that research points to over and over and over again in helping break the cycle of depression and even staving it off, it's so simple. Ready? It's so simple. Get outside. The healing properties of us going out and, hiking or just sitting in creation, it is one of the most powerful and positive things and simple thing. Isn't it interesting? It's the simple stuff that we don't do. Get outside. Another thing to do is this. Tell your family and friends when you're struggling with depression. Tell them. And here's how the cycle of depression can work, and this is how it's worked in my brain before. It's like, gosh, they're not asking me about this. They don't care. And if I have to tell them that I am dealing with this inside in my head right now, then shame on them. They should know. They should know. They should be helpful. That's just part of the darkness. What we need to do is, in the middle of that, acknowledge, okay, yeah, they should be asking, and yeah, they should be a little more attentive to me, but I'm going to do my part and ask for help and tell them. Maybe I got to grab them by the arm and sit them down and say, hey, this is what's happening up here in my head, and I need you to help me, and I need you to be there for me in maybe some new ways. But tell people, tell family and friends. And another good piece of advice, and again, one of the simplest, kind of like going outside, one of the simplest and most effective that researchers point to is that, hey, you want to keep from being depressed or work your way back into an upward spiral, it's this: help other people. It's so simple. Help other people. There's a phrase that's been in my head for a long time. It feels good to do good. It feels good to do good. It always feels good to do good. And so helping other people is a great way to fend off despair and depression. So a few quick suggestions. Help your neighbors. Look for opportunities to help your literal neighbors. Jump in. They're painting the roof. They're moving. They're, mowing. They're whatever. Look for opportunities to help your neighbors. Find ways to serve here at church. Serve at Hillcrest, one of our local ministries for homeless people, to get people out of homelessness. If you're more of an animal person than a human person, what about Wayside Waifs or one of the other shelters here that work with animals? Our Raytown campus is serving meals every other Wednesday. We need people that will serve there to help that happen. Back snacks. We pack back snacks every week for food insecure kids so that they have food on the weekends. You can do that too. I'm just scratching the surface here. Visit people who are homebound. We've got systems for that too. If you want to help be there for somebody, an older adult that would just love a visit, I'm telling you, find that way to serve. It feels good to do good. Experienced this myself a few weeks ago. It was right before school started, and I got a call from the Amazing Swansons. Now, there are two Amazing Swanson families here that I know, but this happens to be Brian and Rachel Swanson and their three kids, Livy and Rosie and Poppy. And so I got a call, and it was on like a Thursday night, and Rachel's like, hey, I've got to go to school tomorrow, before school started, but she had some preschool stuff going on, and Brian had to do something with her oldest daughter. They're like, we need somebody just will sit here early tomorrow morning and be with the kids so that while they're sleeping, they're not alone, right? Would you come over early Friday morning? And my first thought is, Friday's my day off. I don't do anything early on a Friday morning. But I love the Amazing Swanson, so I'm like, yes, tell me what time to be there. So I get there Friday morning about 6:45, and they're like, Rachel's there. She's heading out the door. She's like, the kids are asleep. Rosie and Poppy are asleep. So Brian should be back mid-morning, just hang out and do whatever. So I'm just sitting in the living room on my phone reading something, and about 30 minutes later, Rosie comes downstairs in her pajamas, and she's like, hey, Aaron, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, I'm just hanging out with you guys. Your dad will be back in a while, hour or so. I'm like, oh, okay. So she's just chatting away. We're just talking about life, And then Poppy comes downstairs, and she's rubbing the sleep out of her eyes, and she's like, hey, Aaron, what are you doing here? Same story, and so we're just talking. They're just the brightest kids, and they love to converse, And so we're just chatting away, and suddenly there's a pause, and they look at me almost simultaneous and say, what about breakfast? So I'm like, well, that wasn't part of the plan, but what do you want? And they're like, pancakes. So I'm like, well, I am a really good pancake maker. So they're like, where's the griddle? They know where everything is. They get everything out. I'm like, well, where's the pancake mix? and they produce this box of, is it up there? The Fruity Pebble pancake mix. Like, oh my gosh, we are so making Fruity Pebble pancakes. And then questions started popping up. And the answer was, yes, they'll be better with chocolate chips in them. Let's find the chocolate chips. And yes, they will be better with icing on them, won't they? So we get the icing out. And we're, elbow deep in making pancakes. And then we decide in the middle of making pancakes, you need to have a dance party a little bit. So we're having a dance party. And I figure while I'm doing this, okay, Brian's not going to be here for another hour. So I will have this all cleaned up. There'll be no evidence but an empty box, right? But no, Brian walks in the middle of the pancake eating, making dance party, and I'm like, hey, Brian, come join us. And we just had a ball. I just had an absolute ball. I was there an hour and a half or 2 hours. And here's what I didn't tell the Swansons, is I had a really bad week that week. And I was bumping up against that door of darkness. And their invitation pulled me way back into a place of light because it feels good to do good. Serving other people is one of the best things we can do to avoid the darkness. You get what I'm saying, right? And the worst thing you want to do when you're feeling depressed is like, gosh, I don't have the energy to go help people. I don't want to be around people, and I don't want to. What we can do in times like this, when we can acknowledge this, is to say, I know I've got to do it even if I don't want to, because it will be so healing. Next time I'm there, I know I'm gonna find a way to help, because I know it's one of the great ways of being healed. Okay, last thing that I want to talk about is the most important when it comes to us dealing with depression, avoiding it, addressing it. Is the greatest resource you have as a Christian is your faith in Jesus. And of course, you knew I was going to say that, right? But listen, hope is at the heart of what it means to follow Jesus. Hope is at the heart of the good news, which gospel means good news, of the gospel. Hope. Faith and spirituality will not make you immune to depression. That's one thing that we got to acknowledge too. Faith and spirituality will not make you immune to depression. It's not going to take away the fact that there are times when life just sucks, when relationships are painful, when there's grief. Sometimes it's, depression is about brain chemistry and body chemistry. Your faith is not going to solve those immediately, the circumstances that you have, but your faith will be an anchor to hold on to in the middle of the storm. Something you can hold on to in the middle of the storm. Maybe you've heard this before or said it before. I've heard other people say, hey, the Bible and Christianity, it's this Pollyanna story. This Pollyanna story about how everything's going to go peachy and be perfect if you follow Jesus. And if anybody ever says that to you, just say, hey, read the book. This is not a Pollyanna story where everything goes peachy when people decide to put their faith in God and follow Jesus. It's not a story about everything being peachy. It's a story about real people who have real pain. And it's about people that, in the middle of that pain, hold on to and trust God. Let me give you some examples about this. Let's start off with Moses. Moses is one of the biggest characters, if not the biggest character in the Old Testament. Moses, one of our spiritual ancestors. And Moses was the one that God chose to lead the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, our spiritual ancestors, out of their slavery in Egypt and to the promised land, right? So he leads them out of Egypt. They go to Mount Sinai. Moses gets the 10 commandments, and then they're headed to the promised land. And that's when the leaders of Israel are like, we don't like you, Moses. Lots of reasons they had. We don't like you, Moses. We want to fire you. And by fire, we mean kill you. So what does Moses do? Well, he prays. Actually, get this, he goes out into the wilderness. There's that thing, get outside, A little easier for them than us probably, but he gets out into the wilderness and he prays. And check out his prayer. He's talking to God honestly, and he says, God, if you are going to treat me like this, have pity on me and kill me so that I won't have to endure your cruelty any longer. That's what Moses prays. He wants to die. You ever prayed real honest prayers like that to God? Is it reassuring to you to know that some of the big names prayed a prayer like that? It should give you permission. You can be honest with God. You can be transparent with God. You can lay it all out there in whatever language you want to lay it out there. God's like, I get it. I understand. But Moses is like, I'm done. Just kill me. Then there's Job. Anybody heard of Job, like the suffering of Job? And it's kind of it's worked into our secular vernacular. Suffering of Job, and he did suffer. The book of Job in our Bible is an epic poem of this man's suffering and interaction with God and friends. And beginning of the story, Job loses everything. Well, not quite everything. He loses his children. They're killed in a natural disaster. He loses his health. He's covered in boils. He loses his livelihood. He loses so much. And he questions, God, what are you doing to me? Did I do something wrong? And he's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't get this. And he's got friends. He's got friends, but they're the wrong kind of friends that we talked about earlier. His friends gather around him, and they sit in silence for a little while. Then they ask him, Job, come on, just get honest. You did something nasty, didn't you? You did something secret. You did something that God is ticked off at you about. That's why all these bad things have happened to you. Just confess them. Come on, get them out. And Job's like, no, you don't get it. I've been a righteous man. None of this makes sense. These friends aren't really doing the job that they need to do. But they're doing better than Job's wife did. Job's wife said these words to her husband, why don't you curse God and die?
Thank you, honey. Really appreciate feeling the love.
Wow. Don't you want to know what happened after that? Job's miserable. King David seemed to struggle with depression a lot. When you read the Psalms, and the Psalms, if you have a physical Bible, you open it up and to the very middle and you hit the book of Psalms. It's right there at the heart of the Bible. And Psalms are written out songs. We don't have the tunes, but we have the lyrics. It's the ancient songbook of our spiritual ancestors, right? David wrote a lot of those, and about a third of them are songs of complaint and songs of lament. These real raw prayers where David's just saying, what's going on? He's hurting. Like, this is Psalm 13. David wrote this one, talking to God. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. Can you feel the despair in there? This is palpable to me. Then there's Elijah, the prophet Elijah. And Elijah is in trouble in this particular time in his life because he had pointed out that these false prophets had invaded the country of Israel. And so it was his job to round them up and get rid of them. And so he did, but they were like pet prophets of Queen Jezebel. And Queen Jezebel was, what's the nice way of putting this? Ticked off. And so she sent an army to just kill Elijah. And so Elijah is on the run. He's out in the wilderness again. He's on the run, and he's on the run for quite a while to a point where he's utterly exhausted. He collapses under a tree, and here's the prayer that he prays. Check this out. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors who have already died. What's he saying there? I give up. Just kill me. Can't do it anymore. There were women in the Bible too. Hagar wept when Abraham, in essence, divorced her and sent her and her little boy out into the wilderness. Just get out of here. Naomi, I love the story of Naomi. After the death of her husband and her 2 sons, she changes her name, or says she wants to. I'm changing my name from Naomi to Mara. Mara is a Hebrew word. It means bitterness. Just call me bitterness. My life is that bad. Wow. There's Rebecca, who wept because for years she couldn't have children. There's the prostitute who wept at Jesus' feet because she felt so dirty, so sinful. And all these people, it's just a small sampling of the people in the Bible that carry deep, deep pain. There wasn't a word for depression in the Bible, but you can see it here in these stories. These people were sad and in despair. But you find that every one of these people refuses to give up hope. That every one of these people still clings to God and trusts that God is going to make something good come out of something bad. Like right after David says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Have you forgotten me completely? Show me something, or I'm going to die." Right after David writes those words, here's what he writes: "But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you've rescued me. I will sing to the Lord." I mean, he's not saying, "I'm going to rejoice now. I'm not going to sing now." He's saying, there'll come a point. I trust that there will come a point when I will sing and give thanks and praise you. Right? The dark times were never the end of the story for them. Moses, after he's out there saying, "Kill me," well, 40 years later, he's still leading the Israelites finally to the promised land. He got them there. And we tell his story over and over again because he trusted God and he didn't give up. He didn't give up. Naomi's daughter-in-law, remember, Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. Call me bitterness." Well, her daughter-in-law remarried and produced a grandchild for her, and then there was a great-grandchild, and then there was a great-great-grandchild, and that great-great-grandchild was David, King David, and she saw the joy of being a grandparent. This woman who said, "Call me bitterness," she trusted God. David ruled over Israel, became Israel's greatest king. The prostitute at Jesus' feet, she got up and walked away a new person because Jesus gave her forgiveness and hope and new life. And then, of course, we've got to talk about Jesus. Remember, he's hanging on the cross. And he says from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And that's a place of despair, isn't it? But then, after his death, 3 days later, he comes back and he says, "Because I live, you shall live also." Easter is God's way of saying the worst thing is never the last thing. Easter is God's way of saying there is always hope. We choose hope. I think our hope is our best weapon against depression. Our hope. We choose to believe that our lives have meaning and purpose. We choose to believe that we are loved by God no matter what. We trust that even in our worst times, suffering, difficulty, that God will bring something good out of those times. We choose to hold on to our faith with just white knuckle tightness because we trust, even when we have no evidence of it. The writer of Hebrews reiterates that. The writer says, "Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see." And hope is saying, I can't see it yet. I can't see it yet. Key word, yet. I can't see it yet, but something is coming. God is at work. And hope is so important because, you know this, hopelessness is a killer. Hopelessness is a big piece of why people move into depression and why they take their lives. Let's talk briefly about that. After accidents, suicide is the leading killer of young people in our country. 18% of high school students have serious thoughts about suicide. 45% of LGBTQ youth have serious thoughts about suicide. 45%. Each year, between 40 and 50,000 people complete suicide in the U.S., and for each suicide completed, there are approximately 25 attempts. Do the math, that's 1.2 million, approximately 1.2 million attempts every year. Men are 4 times more likely than women to take their own lives, but women attempt suicide 4 times as often as men do. And I read that for each person that completes suicide, there are an average of 6 close relatives whose lives are torn apart by that death. They face the heartache, the questions, the pain. And I just want to say it doesn't have to be that way, right? Together we can become bearers of light and bearers of life. We can learn to see the signs better. So what are the warning signs? I mean, we've talked about this in February, but it's worth repeating. What are the warning signs when you see these in other people? Well, number one, they talk about suicide. They may glorify it when they see that someone has taken their life. They start giving things away. There's a withdrawal from friends and family. There's changes in eating and sleeping patterns and subtle references to leaving. Lots of these things are seen in depression too, right? See how close these are related. And if somebody starts showing these signs, what do? Number one, take them seriously. Don't write it off. Don't say, oh, you'll be fine. You know, you've been through this before. You'll be good. You got everything you need. Do not say that. Say, tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me what's going on. You ask questions. Then you ask the hard questions. We've got to be prepared to do this. Ask them, are you thinking about hurting yourself or taking your life? Does anybody like asking that question of anybody? No. Do we have to do it? Yes. One of the biggest fears that we hear about is people say, well, I'm afraid of if I ask them that question, it'll be like planting a seed in their mind about taking their own life. No. Nope. Research tells us that is never the case. You got to ask the question. And so what happens if somebody says, yes? Well, the first thing is do not leave them alone at that point. You know, either you need to stay with them or find someone to stay with them. Do not leave them alone. And then get help. You can get help a number of ways. You can take that person to the emergency room. That may not be necessary, but that's one option for sure. Another option is to call a crisis helpline. I'll put the numbers on the screen. I did this in February. If you do not have these in your phone, just snap a picture of these numbers and get them in your phone, enter them in your contacts. But you almost don't need those anymore because they just started the 988 number, which is the Suicide and Crisis Direct Line, 988, rather than 911. If someone is in a mental health crisis, thinking of suicide, 988 is the number. Remember these things. Just have these as a resource. It will save somebody's life. When we're low, when we're depressed, thinking about taking our lives, we need other people around us who are going to help us to choose another way. And there is another way. Now, I want to wrap up by letting you hear from a guy named Kevin Hines. You may have heard his story or seen his story before. But Kevin Hines went to the Golden Gate Bridge prepared to jump off and end his life. And he went there, and in his mind, he's thinking, okay, if somebody does one of these 3 things, I will not jump. If somebody does one of these 3 things, if someone will just smile at me, I won't jump. If someone will look at me and say, are you okay? I won't jump. If someone will say, do you need some help? I won't jump. So he went there hoping, didn't he? Hoping somebody would intervene. Let's take a look at what happened. Here's his story.
Since 1937, over 2,000 people have died at the Golden Gate Bridge. I feel lucky to be alive every single day. Of the thousands that have died off the Golden Gate Bridge, I am of the 1% who have survived. I vividly remember writing my suicide note. People don't get it. Like, I thought I was a burden to everyone who loved me because that's what my brain told me, because that's how powerful your brain is. I got off the bus. I walked slowly down the walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge. You know, people rode by me, drove by me, walked by me, and a woman approached me and she said, "Will you take my picture?" She said thanks and she walked away. It was that moment I just said, nobody cares. The reality was that everybody cared. I just couldn't see it. I ran forward and using my 2 hands, I catapulted myself into free fall. What I'm about to say is the exact same thing that 19 Golden Gate Bridge jump survivors have also said. The millisecond my hands left the rail, it was an instant regret. Today, no matter the pain I'm in, no matter the struggles I experience, I do believe that life is the greatest gift we've ever been given. And if you're suffering mentally, don't wait like I did, sitting in denial.